I gave my company everything: late nights, missed birthdays, loyalty that never wavered. But when a major deal went sideways, one I warned my boss about weeks earlier, he needed a fall guy. And he picked me. I still remember the HR meeting, the way he leaned back in his chair, ice cold, as he called me reckless and unreliable. He knew it was a lie. He knew it was his own greed and shortcuts that doomed the project. But in front of the executives, he threw me under the bus. No investigation. No chance to defend myself. Just a pink slip and a ruined reputation. That was supposed to be the end of my career. But instead, it became the start of my revenge. Because if he thought I'd crawl away quietly, he underestimated the wrong man. My name is Daniel Rourke. I'm 36 years old, male, and until 6 months ago I was a senior account manager at Halverson & Cole, a mid-sized consulting firm in Chicago. On paper, my job was simple: manage client portfolios, keep contracts renewed, and keep the executives happy. In reality, it meant 12-hour days, endless calls, and being the buffer between a greedy boss and clients who expected results. The day it all collapsed is etched into me like a scar. It was a Thursday morning, 9:15 a.m. sharp, when I was called into the 12th floor conference room. The carpet still smelled faintly of fresh cleaning solution, and the blinds rattled against the windows from the autumn wind outside. HR was already seated, two of them with notepads open, pens poised. My boss, Martin Halverson himself, sat at the end of the table, jacket off, tie loosened, trying to look like the picture of disappointment instead of the architect of disaster. He didn't even let me sit before he launched into it. "Daniel," he said, voice low and deliberate, "your handling of the Larkins account has left us exposed. You failed to meet deadlines, you ignored client concerns, and you misrepresented our capabilities. This is unacceptable." I remember blinking, trying to process the words. The Larkins deal wasn't just my account, it was his. He had personally pushed for cutting the delivery timeline from 12 weeks to 8, against my repeated warnings. I had emails, timestamps, draft proposals with red marks where I had written, "This will not work." But in that moment, none of that mattered. The HR rep, a woman named Grace, adjusted her glasses and slid a file across the table. Inside was a termination letter, already signed by Martin. No investigation. No appeal. Just a pink slip, effective immediately. My chest burned with humiliation. It wasn't just losing the job, it was the deliberate rewriting of the story. Martin knew the executives weren't going to dig into the fine print. He knew most people would believe the simplest explanation, that some mid-level manager botched a contract. And that was me. As I walked out with my box of personal items, my worn leather notebook, a framed photo of my sister's kids, and a coffee mug with a chipped rim, the whispers started. Coworkers avoided my eyes. A few gave me sympathetic nods, but no one spoke up. By the time the elevator doors closed, I knew the verdict had already spread: Daniel Rourke had screwed up. That was the day I became the fall guy. But it was also the day I started planning. The truth is, the collapse of the Larkins deal didn't come out of nowhere. I saw it unraveling weeks before anyone at the top admitted it. That's the curse of being a middleman: you hear the panic in the clients' voices, you see the missed milestones piling up, and you're stuck between executives making promises and teams burning themselves out to deliver the impossible. It started the day Martin cut the project timeline from 12 weeks to 8. He framed it as ambition and hustle, but I knew it was greed. Compressing delivery meant saving on staffing costs, which meant padding his quarterly bonus. On September 3rd, at 11:47 p.m., I sent him an email with the subject line, "Timeline risks, urgent." In it, I laid out a bullet point list: incomplete data migrations, unresolved vendor dependencies, client-side approvals not finalized. I ended it with, "This deadline is not achievable without risking failure." He replied at 12:06 a.m. with just 2 words, "Make it happen." I still have that email. The first cracks showed 2 weeks later. On September 18th, I got a call from Melissa Larkin herself. She sounded more exhausted than angry, but her words were razor sharp. "Daniel, your team promised a demo environment by Monday. It's Wednesday. Where is it?" I remember pressing my phone against my forehead, staring at the progress logs on my second monitor. The developers had been working 70-hour weeks, but the server issues were unresolved. I explained as best I could, taking the heat, promising solutions. What I didn't say was that the deadline was a fantasy from the start. I brought the issue to Martin the next morning. He didn't even look up from his phone. "They'll get over it once the final product is in their hands. Stop babysitting the client." That was his strategy: delay, deflect, and assume that the end result would erase the pain along the way. But clients don't forget broken promises. Every missed milestone became a hairline fracture in the relationship, and Martin kept swinging the hammer. By October 2nd, the fractures had become fissures. I sat in a client review call with the Larkins team, and one of their VPs openly questioned whether Halverson and Cole had misrepresented their capabilities in the proposal. I knew exactly why they thought that, because Martin had inflated the scope during negotiations. He told them we had a dedicated infrastructure team when in reality, we were borrowing 2 engineers part-time from another project. That same afternoon, I walked into his office with a printed log of missed deadlines, client complaints, and internal red flags. I laid it on his desk, page after page. He didn't even glance at it. "Daniel, your job is to manage perception, not to be the boy who cries wolf." I stared at him, stunned. "These aren't wolves, Martin. These are facts." He smiled thinly, the kind of smile that makes your skin crawl. "Then bury the facts." That's when I realized something important. Martin wasn't ignoring the warnings. He was choosing to. Because if the deal went through, he'd be hailed as the man who delivered a miracle timeline. And if it collapsed, well, he'd need someone to blame. I just didn't realize yet that I'd already been cast for that role. The first time I realized Martin was setting me up, it was subtle, too subtle for me to act on. A Tuesday morning strategy meeting, late September, with 12 people crammed around the polished walnut conference table. The air smelled of burnt coffee and the faint tang of dry erase markers. The Larkins account was on the agenda. Martin opened with his trademark confidence, pacing the front of the room like a performer. "We're pushing boundaries here," he said, gesturing toward the slides. 8 weeks. No other firm would dare promise this. But with Daniel's leadership, I believe we can deliver. That last part should have been flattering. Instead, it felt like a spotlight turning hot on my skin. He wasn't taking responsibility, he was assigning it. Out loud. In front of witnesses. As the meeting went on, every ambitious deadline he announced was attributed to me. Daniel signed off on the delivery schedule. Daniel assured me the infrastructure bottlenecks were under control. None of it was true. My memo said the opposite. But in that room, perception mattered more than paper trails. I remember catching the eye of Karen Wu, one of the project analysts. She looked down quickly, as if she already knew where this was headed. The following week, it escalated. A tense call with the Larkins executives had just ended, their frustration bleeding through every word. As soon as I hung up, Martin walked into my cubicle area, loud enough for others to hear. "Daniel, what the hell happened? You were supposed to keep them calm." I froze, half a dozen coworkers within earshot. "I updated them on the delays you approved," I said carefully. He leaned in, voice dropping low. "Say that again, and you won't have a desk tomorrow." Then, louder again, "You need to own this, Daniel. Fix it." It was theater. He was building a narrative brick by brick, each moment designed to paint me as the weak link. And I realized the genius of his approach. By the time the project inevitably collapsed, no one would even question who was at fault. He'd already written the script. The final blow came in the boardroom on October 9th. A quarterly review, half the senior partners present. Martin clicked through slides showing progress that barely resembled reality. When one partner asked about client satisfaction scores, he didn't hesitate. "There's been turbulence," he admitted smoothly, "but Daniel has assured me it's under control." My throat went dry. I opened my mouth to object, but Martin cut me off, handing me the floor with a saccharine smile. "Go ahead, Daniel. Tell them how you're handling it." I looked at the rows of expectant faces, executives with pens hovering above notebooks, ready to capture my every word. If I contradicted him, I'd look disorganized, defensive. If I played along, I'd be complicit in the lie. I chose silence. That was the moment I knew, Martin wasn't just reckless, he was ruthless. And I wasn't just a convenient scapegoat. I was the shield he planned to hide behind when the whole thing exploded. And I could already hear the ticking of the bomb. The collapse came faster than even I expected. By mid-October, the Larkins team stopped masking their frustration with polite corporate phrases. Their emails grew blunt, sometimes just a single line in bold, "Where is this deliverable?" I spent nights drafting carefully worded responses, attaching progress logs, spinning half-truths into something that looked like momentum. But the cracks were impossible to hide. On October 21st, everything broke. Larkins pulled the plug. They terminated the contract, citing breach of delivery terms. The amount on the invoice, $2.4 million, vanished from Halverson and Cole's books in an instant. That morning, I was summoned again to the 12th floor conference room. This time there was no pretense. Martin was waiting with 2 HR reps, folders already stacked in front of them. He didn't waste words. "Daniel, this is a catastrophe. You mismanaged timelines, overpromised to the client, and failed to deliver." I tried to speak, to lay out the evidence, but Grace from HR held up a hand. "Daniel, this is not the time. The decision's been made." The decision. Like my career was just a switch someone could flip off. By noon, the email blast went out internally: "Daniel Rourke is no longer with the firm. We thank him for his contributions and wish him well in his future endeavors." Cold. Sterile. A corporate obituary. What followed was worse than the firing itself. In the consulting world, reputations spread faster than facts. Within 48 hours, recruiters stopped returning my calls. A colleague at another firm texted me late one night, "Word is you tanked the Larkins account." Sorry, man. The part that cut deepest wasn't the lies. It was the silence of the people who knew better. The developers who'd worked 70-hour weeks, the analysts who'd seen Martin ignore every red flag, none of them spoke up. Self-preservation outweighed loyalty. I couldn't blame them. But it left me isolated, branded as incompetent. Even my personal life took the hit. My sister, Emily, called me after she saw the news ripple through LinkedIn. "Danny, are you okay?" she asked softly. I could hear her kids in the background, their laughter a cruel reminder of the normal life I no longer had. I lied, said I was fine, said I'd bounce back. But I hung up and sat in the dark for hours, staring at my notebook full of timelines, warnings, and email printouts. That notebook became my anchor. Every detail I'd documented, every ignored warning, every order Martin had barked. He thought he could rewrite the story, but I had the original draft. And in that quiet, humiliating aftermath, I made myself a promise: if he wanted me to be the scapegoat, fine. I'd play the part, but when the curtain rose on Act 2, the story would belong to me. Losing my job was one thing. Losing my name, that was harder. For weeks after the termination, I woke up every morning with the same weight on my chest, like someone had carved failure into my skin. My LinkedIn inbox sat silent. Calls I made to old contacts were politely declined or ignored. In consulting, reputation is currency, and Martin had bankrupted me overnight. But I wasn't about to disappear quietly. The first thing I did was dig through my apartment for the box I carried out on that last day. Inside, buried between the photo of my nieces and the chipped coffee mug, was my worn leather notebook. Every page was filled with dates, timestamps, and details Martin had wanted buried. I flipped through the pages for hours, reliving every ignored warning, every instruction to make it happen, every meeting where he'd twisted the truth. Next came the emails. I still had access to my personal archive, hundreds of messages I'd blind copied to myself over the months. I spent late nights categorizing them into folders: warnings, direct orders, client complaints, contradictions. By the end of November, I had a digital dossier thicker than most trial exhibits. Still, evidence alone wasn't enough. I needed a strategy. If I went straight to the press, it would look like a bitter ex-employee lashing out. If I went to regulators, the process would drown in red tape. No, the key was to strike at the artery that kept Halverson and Cole alive, their clients. That thought hit me one night as I scrolled through old contact lists. I knew those clients better than Martin ever did. I knew their frustrations, their pain points, the exact lies they'd been fed. And more importantly, I had proof. But before I could make any moves, I had to rebuild myself. I picked up contract work under the radar, spreadsheet cleanups, budget reviews, anything that paid the bills while keeping me off Martin's radar. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me breathing room. More importantly, it gave me time to plan. In December, I rented a small office, bare walls, one desk, a second-hand Dell tower that whined when it booted up. That office became my war room. On one wall, I pinned a timeline of the Larkins account, each missed milestone marked in red. On another, I taped copies of Martin's emails, his casual arrogance now immortalized in black ink. I wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. Not yet. I was thinking about precision. If I moved too early, I'd look desperate. If I waited too long, the trail might grow cold. But somewhere in the middle, if I timed it right, I could hit him where it hurt most, with proof so undeniable it would collapse him from the inside. It was in that empty office, on a snowy night just before Christmas, that I wrote 4 words on a fresh page of my notebook. The clients deserve truth. That became my guiding principle. Not vengeance, not vindication. Just truth. But I knew that truth, handled correctly, could be the sharpest blade of all. When January rolled around, I knew it was time to stop licking my wounds and start moving. Halverson and Cole had survived the Larkins disaster, at least outwardly. Their press release painted it as a mutual restructuring of the contract. Typical corporate spin. But I knew the truth, and more importantly, I knew every other client deserved to know it too. I started with the people I trusted most, clients I'd built genuine relationships with over the years, the ones who'd called me directly when they were frustrated rather than funneling complaints through account liaisons. One of them was Mark Ellison at Haverford Logistics. I still remember dialing his number, my hands slick with sweat. "Daniel," he said when he picked up, surprised but not unkind. "Didn't expect to hear from you. I heard things. Ended badly." "That's one way to put it," I said carefully. "Mark, I need to show you something. Not rumors, not spin. Documents. Emails. Proof." There was a pause on the line, then a low exhale. "Meet me." That became the pattern. I didn't send mass emails or blast accusations online. I went client by client, face to face, sliding folders across polished desks and conference tables. Each folder contained a curated set of documents, Martin's orders contradicting promises, timeline warnings he'd dismissed, records of me flagging risks he'd ignored. I didn't editorialize. I just presented the evidence. Some clients reacted with anger. Others with quiet resignation, as if my proof only confirmed what they already suspected. But every single one of them asked the same question in the end: "Why are you telling me this?" My answer never changed. "Because you deserve the truth. And because if he did it to me, he'll do it to you." By mid-February, word was spreading in the shadows. Clients started asking harder questions during review calls. Project managers whispered about unusual requests for status reports. Martin probably thought it was just nerves after the Larkins collapse. He had no idea it was me, methodically arming the very people who kept his firm afloat. Still, I wasn't reckless. I kept my name out of every paper trail. I met clients off the record, in diners, coffee shops, even one tense meeting in the back of a parked car during a snowstorm. I brought only what was verifiable: emails with timestamps, logs with signatures, details that could stand up under scrutiny. No one could accuse me of exaggeration. And slowly, I began to see the shift. Clients who once spoke of Halverson and Cole with deference now used words like distrust and review. It was subtle, like hairline cracks spidering across glass. But I knew what cracks became, given enough pressure. That was the beginning of my counterattack. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't raging. I was planting seeds of doubt, watered with truth. And Martin, in his arrogance, was too busy chasing the next big account to notice the ground softening beneath his feet. By March, I had the client's attention. But suspicion alone wouldn't be enough to bring Martin down. Executives like him thrived in gray areas, where everything was a matter of interpretation and no one wanted to dig too deep. If I wanted to expose him, I needed hard evidence, records he couldn't dismiss or spin. So I started tracing the paper trails. I spent weeks combing through the emails I'd saved, cross-referencing them with project logs and billing statements. The inconsistencies jumped out immediately. For example, on September 14th, Martin told the Larkins team that our dedicated infrastructure unit was already building their demo environment. But the internal time logs showed that those same engineers were still clocked full-time on another client's system. Billing records proved Halverson and Cole charged both clients for the same hours. That wasn't just negligence. That was fraud. The deeper I dug, the more smoke I found. Vendor invoices backdated by a week. Status reports edited after submission, with earlier drafts quietly deleted from the shared drive. Project budgets padded with miscellaneous consulting fees that no one on the team could explain. I started color-coding the evidence: green for negligence, yellow for deception, red for outright fraud. By the end of the month, my wall looked like a mosaic of corruption. But I knew better than to rely only on what I already had. I needed fresh proof, something recent, something undeniable. That's when I called an old friend, Ravi Patel, one of the senior developers still stuck at Halverson and Cole. We met at a noisy sports bar downtown, where the music drowned out most of the conversation. Ravi looked tired, his eyes shadowed by long hours and stress. "Dan, you don't know how bad it's gotten," he said, nursing his beer. "They're recycling deliverables. Literally reusing slide decks from old projects and charging as if they're custom." I leaned in. "Can you get me copies?" He hesitated. "If they trace it back to me, I'm finished." I slid a flash drive across the table. "Strip the metadata. Send it from an anonymous account. No one will know." 2 weeks later, a batch of files landed in my encrypted inbox. Audit logs, draft decks with conflicting timestamps, emails where Martin explicitly told Ravi to rebrand old assets for billing efficiency. In plain English, lie to the client, call it innovation, and pocket the difference. With Ravi's files, my case became airtight. The smokescreens were no longer just circumstantial, they were deliberate, documented, and systematic. The irony was almost poetic. Martin had built his empire on perception, on convincing clients he could deliver miracles, and here I was, building a case that showed every miracle was smoke and mirrors. All I needed now was the right moment, and the right audience, to set it on fire. By April, the cracks in Halverson and Cole's facade were starting to show. Clients who once took Martin's word as gospel began demanding detailed reports. A few even requested third-party audits of their ongoing projects. I knew those ripples weren't coincidence, they were the result of the seeds I'd planted, now germinating into doubt. And I kept watering them. Every week, I released another drop of truth into the pool. A redacted email here, a scrubbed log there. Nothing overwhelming, just enough to raise questions. I was careful, strategic. If I dumped everything at once, Martin would go on the defensive, rallying his lawyers and spinning a counter-narrative. But if I kept the pressure steady, the clients would do the work for me, each of them prying open cracks in the walls he'd built. The first real fracture came from Haverford Logistics. Mark Ellison called me one Friday evening, his tone sharper than usual. "Daniel, we ran an internal check. Those hours we were billed for infrastructure support last fall? They overlap with work another client was charged for. Care to explain that?" I didn't answer directly. I didn't need to. I just forwarded him one of Martin's emails where he'd signed off on strategic reallocation of engineering hours. The phrase sounded harmless, until you lined it up against the invoices. Then it looked like theft. 2 weeks later, Haverford quietly suspended their contract with Halverson and Cole. Word spread. Clients started calling each other, comparing notes. A kind of informal coalition was forming, bound not by loyalty but by suspicion. And once suspicion becomes shared knowledge, it hardens into certainty. Inside the firm, I could sense the panic even without being there. Ravi texted me updates late at night. Martin's holding daily damage control meetings. Half the account managers are scrambling to rewrite timelines. Karen Wu looks like she wants to quit. I could almost picture the 12th floor conference room, blinds drawn, coffee cups piling up, Martin barking orders with that false bravado he wore like a second skin. He must have known something was happening, but he couldn't quite trace it back to me. That was the beauty of my approach, every client thought they'd uncovered the truth themselves. By early May, the net was fully cast. I had evidence distributed across 6 major clients, each holding a piece of the puzzle. None of them knew the full scope yet, but they didn't need to. All that mattered was that they were circling, sniffing out blood in the water. And Martin? He was the shark who didn't realize the ocean was already full of hooks. The pressure was working. For the first time since my firing, I felt the weight shift. The story was no longer just me versus him. It was Martin against the truth, and the truth was no longer mine alone to carry. By summer, I knew the moment had come. The clients weren't just doubting Halverson and Cole anymore, they were actively looking for alternatives. And I was right there, waiting with open hands. I didn't make a flashy announcement. I didn't post anything online or send out glossy brochures. Instead, I drafted a single-page letter under the name of a brand new entity, Rourke Advisory Group. The tagline was simple, deliberate, transparent consulting. No smoke. No mirrors. Then I called the clients who trusted me most. The first to sign was Haverford Logistics. Mark Ellison had seen enough by then. We met in his office on a muggy June afternoon, the air conditioner rattling in the corner. I slid a contract across the table, leaner, cheaper, and with deliverables spelled out in plain English. He read it twice, then looked up at me. "Daniel, are you ready for this? Because once I move, others will follow." "I've been ready since the day Martin set me up," I said. He signed without hesitation. Over the next 6 weeks, 3 more clients followed. Not all at once, but steadily, each defection like a crack in a dam. By August, I had enough revenue lined up to hire a small team, 5 people who had either left Halverson and Cole in frustration or were eager to escape the sinking ship. Ravi joined first, sliding me a resignation letter he said he'd been sitting on for months. Karen Wu came next, her quiet fury finally boiling over. We moved into a modest office on the west side of Chicago, a converted warehouse space with exposed brick and squeaky floorboards. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt alive. Every desk was piled with binders, laptops, and stacks of sticky notes. At night, when the city lights bled through the windows, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: purpose. Meanwhile, Halverson and Cole staggered under the weight of lost contracts. Rumors swirled of delayed payroll, partners arguing in closed-door meetings, Martin retreating further into his office. I knew the firm wasn't dead yet, but the bleeding had started, and there was no tourniquet strong enough to stop it. The sweetest part wasn't the contracts or the new office. It was the silence. Martin still had no idea I was behind the exodus. To him, it probably looked like bad luck, bad timing, or maybe just a shift in the market. He didn't see my fingerprints because I'd been meticulous about leaving none. But that wouldn't last forever. I wasn't building this firm just to compete with him. I was building it as a staging ground for the trap I was about to spring. Because Martin thought the worst had already passed. He thought losing clients was just a rough patch. What he didn't know was that I hadn't even shown him my sharpest blade yet. The trap had to be flawless. If I made one wrong move, Martin would twist it into a story of a bitter ex-employee trying to sabotage him. I needed proof so undeniable, so meticulously verified, that not even his lawyers could bury it. I started by stitching everything together. Months of emails, billing records, audit logs, and Ravi's salvaged files. I built a timeline, day by day, hour by hour, showing exactly how Martin had lied, double-billed, and misled clients. I cross-referenced every claim with metadata, signatures, and document trails. Nothing was left ambiguous. But raw evidence wasn't enough. I needed corroboration. That's where the clients came in. Quietly, I reached out to the 4 who had already defected to Rourke Advisory. I asked them to provide their side of the story: invoices, call notes, even screenshots of Slack threads where Halverson and Cole's failures had been discussed internally. Piece by piece, the puzzle grew into something no one could ignore. The final step was delivery. I didn't send the dossier to Martin. That would have been a warning. Instead, I packaged it into 3 identical binders, each stamped with the date, each numbered, each accompanied by a USB drive containing the digital files. One went to a journalist at Midwest Business Review, a reporter known for tearing into corporate fraud. The second went to the State Board of Contracting Oversight. The third went directly to the clients who were still with Halverson and Cole but wavering. I made sure every binder had the same time-stamped cover letter, signed in ink, noting the sources and chain of custody. There could be no question of fabrication. The release was timed for maximum impact. On a Monday morning in September, almost 1 year to the day since the Larkins collapse, the journalist's article dropped online. The headline was brutal. Inside Halverson and Cole's mirage, double billing, false promises, and the collapse of a consulting giant. By noon, the watchdog agency had announced a formal inquiry. By 2 p.m., at least 2 major clients had suspended contracts pending review. And Martin? According to Ravi, he stormed through the office like a man possessed, slamming doors, shouting at assistants, demanding to know who the hell leaked this. He didn't realize there wasn't just a leak. The whole dam had been breached. I didn't watch it unfold from a distance, though. That night, I attended a client dinner where Halverson and Cole had been expected to present their renewal pitch. Instead, their representatives never showed. The clients turned to me. I laid my binder on the table, unopened. "This," I said quietly, "is why I left." The room was silent for a long time. Then one by one, they nodded. Contracts that would have gone to Martin's firm instead came across the table to mine. The trap had closed. And Martin didn't even see the jaws until they snapped shut around him. The morning after the article broke, Chicago's business district buzzed like a hive struck with a stick. Halverson and Cole's name was on every ticker, every newsletter, every whispered conversation in corner offices. The words attached to it weren't innovative or ambitious anymore. They were fraud, oversight, and collapse. By Wednesday, the fallout was visible. 3 major clients froze payments. Another announced publicly that they were terminating all contracts, citing serious ethical concerns. Shares in Halverson and Cole's holding company plummeted nearly 40% in 2 days. The firm tried to spin it, calling the accusations a smear campaign, but the evidence I'd released was too specific, too well documented. Then came the journalists. Cameras staked out the front of their 12th-floor offices. Reporters swarmed executives in the lobby, firing questions about double billing and doctored records. One clip even went viral. Martin himself, red-faced, shoving past microphones, muttering no comment as he ducked into a waiting car. It wasn't just the press. The state board issued subpoenas. Former employees, emboldened now that the first shot had been fired, started speaking up. Ravi told me quietly that HR had been flooded with exit notices. By the end of the month, Nearly a quarter of the staff had either resigned or been furloughed. Watching it all unfold, I felt a strange calm. It wasn't triumph, not exactly. It was inevitability. Martin had built his empire on deception, and now every lie was stacked neatly in the open for all to see. Clients who once wouldn't take my calls now called me first. "Daniel, we read the article. We should talk." Some were angry, some were cautious, but all of them were looking for a lifeboat. And I was ready with one. Rourke Advisory grew faster in 3 months than I'd dared imagine, an influx of contracts, referrals, and desperate executives who wanted one thing above all else: honesty. The public collapse of Halverson & Cole was brutal, but it wasn't sudden. It was the slow-motion implosion of a structure already hollowed out by arrogance and greed. And Martin, who once strutted through boardrooms like he was untouchable, was now a punchline. Anonymous forums called him Miracle Martin, mocking his 8-week promises. Editorial cartoons sketched him standing on a pile of burning invoices. I didn't need to say a word. The world was speaking for me. And yet, I wasn't done. Because for all the headlines, all the resignations, and all the angry clients, Martin himself still hadn't faced me. Not yet. Martin didn't call me. Not once. Not during the collapse, not after the subpoenas, not when the last of his clients defected. The man who had once barked my name across cubicles now acted as if I didn't exist. But I saw him one last time. It was late November, 2 months after the article detonated. I was walking into a cafe near the river when I spotted him outside, sitting alone at a corner table. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loose, his once carefully sculpted hair gone gray at the edges. He looked smaller than I remembered, like the air had been let out of him. For a moment, I almost walked past. Then I stopped. He noticed me, his eyes narrowing as if weighing whether to acknowledge me. Finally, he gave the faintest nod. Not apology. Not recognition. Just acknowledgement. A silent admission that he knew. That he understood what had happened. That he had lost. I didn't sit down. I didn't speak. I just returned the nod, then walked into the cafe. That was all the closure I needed. In the months that followed, Halverson & Cole unraveled completely. The firm dissolved under the weight of lawsuits, unpaid invoices, and regulator findings. Martin disappeared from the industry grapevine, his name synonymous with corporate deceit. Meanwhile, Rourke Advisory thrived. We weren't flashy, but we were steady, transparent, and trusted, everything Martin's empire had pretended to be. Sometimes I think back to that conference room, to the morning I was handed my termination letter. How small and powerless I felt, boxed in by lies and silence. But what Martin never understood is that power built on deception is fragile. All it takes is one person, armed with the truth, to bring it down. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I just kept building, brick by brick, on the foundation he tried to bury me under. And late at night, when the office is quiet and the city hums beyond the windows, I close my notebook, set down my pen, and let the silence settle. Because the story is finished. And the final line is his, not mine. Martin Halverson destroyed himself.